Welcome to this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have Jodi Rose Gonzales. She is a visual artist, art therapist, author, mindfulness coach, and she inspires her students through teachings intended to spread more hope and healing around the world. We'll learn from her art-based mindfulness, how it can help manage anxiety, spark insight, and reignite personal growth. Welcome to the show, Jodi.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. And thank you for all that you do, AJ, for sharing your message of hope and empowerment around the globe. So hello to you this morning. And well, it's morning here. And hello to all of your listeners. I'm delighted to be here today.
You are welcome. Welcome to the show. Welcome to India in this online form. And not only in India, but a lot of people across the globe will benefit from what we'll talk about. We'll talk about how healing through art and mindfulness. We'll talk about empowerment through creativity. But before we come to this, you are also spreading a lot of good things. You are also a podcast host, the I Rose podcast. You went through your book. So we'll talk about all these things. And before we come to talking about the topic of the day, let's talk a bit about your journey, your background, so that people know who they are listening to, Jodi.
Sure. So to begin and to step back a little bit, I'm a big fan of the hero's journey. My artwork is about the hero's journey. The work that I do as a mindfulness coach is about the hero's journey. I think it's an incredible story arc related to transformation and personal growth. And I first really stepped into, I believe we all have many heroes' journeys in our lives, but I first stepped into mine at 19 years old when I went to residential treatment for an eating disorder. And I grew up in a rural community in the upper Midwest. I'm about 6 hours north of Chicago in the US. And so when I went to treatment for this mental health issue, I was exposed to mindfulness and to art therapy and to yoga for the first time. And it just blew my world. It just really offered me a new language and a new way of being and a whole new set of tools. Fast forward through many years of recovery, and ultimately I wanted to become an art therapist. And that was really crossing the threshold into another hero's journey, really deepening my practice in art therapy specifically. But then a few years later, I had a health diagnosis. And the anxiety surrounding the medical procedures and unknown around that was really, I think, the third big threshold I crossed in the hero's journey. And so I really leaned into all the things that I knew as an art therapist, as a yoga teacher, through meditation and mindfulness, and really put those three things together into a unique fusion and framework that is now what I share with people today. And I call it I Rose, but it's art-based mindfulness, essentially. And it has a very specific methodology that brings together Eastern philosophy, specifically non-dualism and the idea of the connection between the mind and body, as well as Western science, specifically neuroscience, which basically, I don't want to say validates, because I think thousands of years of practice certainly validates these mindfulness practices. But I bring together this East meets West, particularly like through a trauma-informed practice, all expressed through art materials and processes and self-expression.
Of course, Jodi. So to understand this best, you talk about empowerment through creativity. And generally people, when you talk about creativity, they think about creative things, which is again right in their own manner. But when you talk about empowerment and healing, and then art and mindfulness, that is where people would want to understand it better. If you can explain where this whole thing about mindfulness and art that can help in healing, and that is where how the word empowerment comes in. Simplify it
Yes.
for the audience.
Yes, yes. And I will acknowledge to you and to the audience, there's a little bit of delay. And so I think I received most of your question. I took some notes and I put stars next to the word empowerment several times. So I heard that come up. So yes, in a nutshell, how to answer this question, how does creativity inform empowerment, and how do we break that down into something that's accessible and understandable? So creativity and creative process, I think, informs two routes to mindfulness. And the first, which I think is often overlooked, is that there's a lot of science around creative processes that demonstrates that the effect on the mind and physical body is very similar to the effects of meditation. So heart and breath rates decrease. There's brainwave changes, decrease in the production of the stress hormone cortisol. So there's a real shift to a feeling of calmness when you do certain creative practices, and a real shift in the physical body. And I think that's really powerful, because I think people intuitively may have a sense that it's relaxing to do a creative thing, but we often don't give ourselves permission. Or we don't really think of it as a valid coping skill or a self-help tool. But specifically, processes that are rhythmic, so these things that call up the body's rest and digest, so things like knitting and crochet, things that are rhythmic, or using materials that are soft, or movable. These things are all like very calming. So this is where we can just not even worry about what we're making, not even worry about finishing it, but just getting it to a creative process that has this like sensory aspect, right? So that can help us manage stress and anxiety. Then, of course, from the mindfulness lens, and maybe more, I don't think more so, I'll circle back to that, but related to empowerment is the knowing oneself better. I think it's easy to move through this world in reactivity, to be in our emotions, or to be triggered by past experiences, viewing current experiences through, or interactions through past interactions or relationships. Art making, we can go into image making and explore the meaning of the image for deeper insight and self-awareness, which then helps us be more intentional. And I think one of the classic definitions of mindfulness is to think about what you're thinking about, and certainly self-expression around a topic can certainly give us space to, I call it mulling things over through materials. What's so beautiful about art-based mindfulness is that you can do both things in one efficient practice. So you can be calming, you can be relaxing the physical body while also acknowledging where one's at emotionally and deepening your insight around it. And so I think empowerment comes, it fits all areas. Like when you can calm your stresses and anxieties so you can think more clearly, sleep better, and be more productive, in that sense, that's certainly very empowering, than rather than having your energy up here and being frenetic and kind of scattered. But then certainly knowing ourselves better and being more intentional as we move through our lives, whether it's the day or the month or whatever, there's certainly empowerment in that as well.
Absolutely, absolutely, Jodi. But then, see, someone will say, Jodi, you are a visual artist, you are an art therapist. I don't know anything about art. So can't I use this particular thing? What would you like to tell them? How to get to this point without being that sort of an artist person?
Oh, that is such a great question. And I sort of have a two-part answer. One for those that say, I am so not creative, I can't even draw a stick figure. And for those that, I work with a lot of people who have creative trauma, who think that they're not the good enough artist, or who had their creativity shut down. So for those that say, well, I'm not an artist, this is not for me, what is so beautiful about this practice is that it acknowledges creativity, not technique, right? So creativity comes in all forms. I do a lot of things with people who say that they're not artists by doing things in nature. Certainly like walking on the beach, making a mandala out of pebbles and stones, or I love to do flower petal mandalas because the color, the texture, the scent, like it's very meditative. It really informs mindfulness. It brings you into the physical body as you have like the sensory aspect of the petals. And then you can do certain processing techniques, like journaling techniques, and just kind of going into using intention and journaling, a little bit more reflection about the thing that you created. So there are so many things that are creative: cooking, music, movement, gardening. I think when you move into it, defining creativity broadly, going to these key elements of, are the senses involved? Are you breathing? Are you, of course, we're all breathing, but so you can do sensory techniques like where you're doing breath with movement, like as you're making marks. So again, that's very, very calming. But you don't need to be able to draw a thing. We're not trying to put things on a refrigerator door. In the States, we, as kids, we put kids' artworks on the refrigerator door. So I like to say that sort of as a joke, because I think many of us think that our art needs to be of some sort of exhibitable quality to count. And really, like I said, there are so many inroads. The other thing is that creativity is an inherent part of us, specifically at the childhood age. We think through symbols and creativity and story making and imagination in our play, particularly like 5 to 7 years old, 5 to 10 years old. So when people get back into just doing something creative for the fun of it without judgment, it can be very freeing for people. And then that relates as well to the people who have their creative traumas. We go back to just some very specific ground rules, like it's okay to be playful. It's okay to just show up in whatever emotions you're in. Sometimes we get locked into this idea that, things need to be perfect and rigid and, just so to put our artwork out there in the world. But really, it's just more of a way to be, to show up to yourself, and to just express what is in your inner world and to move it out into tangible form into the outer world.
Absolutely, Jodi.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when we talk of healing through this, how should one understand healing here? A lot of people have different sort of traumas in life. They have different things that they need to take care of. They are some of these people may be also talking to their therapist and expecting better results there. So what should be the expectation when we talk of art, when we talk of mindfulness with regards to healing of oneself? Are there any boundaries here? It can only do this. For beyond that, you have to actually go to a therapist. How would you like to explain what should be their expectation from this particular sort of things?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. I really like that. Thank you. I think what is healing is an individual answer. It's an individual experience. And I think as people join the practice, I like to say, we make art around their intention. Like, how do you want to feel as a result of this practice? For some people, they want to feel more joy or more purposeful. Maybe they feel a sense of disconnect, so they want to just feel more connected to themselves. Maybe they know they're going through, on the topic of a hero's journey, a transition, whether that's a career transition, the loss of a parent. Some people are moving into retirement. Other people might be getting married or having a child. So they use the practice to explore this transition. There are definitely boundaries between a clinical and a non-clinical practice. And I certainly do both. I think that when people, if they're attracted into this practice as a non-clinical, like just as an extra support for insight and for grounding, it becomes obvious if there's a roadblock or if they want to go deeper. And I always encourage people to just be really open and curious about that, as opposed to judgmental about oneself. Like, it's okay to ask for further help. Maybe you realize you don't need it once you have that conversation. And then if you are already in treatment or realizing that you need to seek treatment, this art-based mindfulness is a wonderful support as you go through that over here. So I hope that answers your question. But I think
Absolutely.
it's always worth the inquiry, like, what is healing to the individual?
Absolutely, absolutely, Jodi. There's much to learn about these things, and I'm sure a lot of learning can happen through your books. And one is about doodle. A lot of people talk about doodle also in terms of giving them that sort of a creativity, sort of a uh, uh, thing in their life. You talk about Doodle's Code, and that's one of the book. Tell us a bit about this book. Can Doodle also? I do. What do you talk about in this particular book of yours? If it is about
Oh,
Doodle, can Doodle talk about creativity? Is that and so also be a part of this whole healing process and art?
Oh, absolutely. So, yes, I have a book called The Doodles Code. And this is it's a great technique, especially for those who think that they're not creative, because even the simplest doodle can be helpful. I basically explain the framework, and I guide people through one simple technique. I also, I like to call these mood doodles. It's just they can be just scribbles using color and line that expresses kind of the energy of what you're feeling. So, for example, for listeners later on the podcast, they wouldn't see, so I'll just describe. Sometimes people just scribble like a dark cloud, like black and gray and brown, and that cloud is like chronic stress, and there might be little blue teardrops because they're sad, or like little red streaks because they're frustrated. Other people might express a situation with calmness. That would certainly be a separate color palette. I see a lot of yellows and light blues, but there's no universal color language. It's unique to the individual. So we work first to just I teach people how to acknowledge where they're at using intention setting, and then just line and color and shape. To just do a quick doodle in 3 to 5 minutes, because we're not trying to make an artwork here. We're simply, and we don't want to stay in the energy of the moment, especially if that's not feeling good, but we do want to honor it, and recognize that it's there. And then I teach a very specific journaling technique. In art therapy, we call it dialoguing, or in the broader sense, processing the artwork. And so you can really get into some of the more subconscious meanings behind the symbolism in the work. So we honor, with our doodles and with all of our images, they come from a part of the mind that is more intuitive and symbolic. And as such, they can carry messages that are either so subtle, like we're just distracted and we're not listening to that inner voice, or maybe we feel like it's overly simplistic because we live in complicated lives. We think we need some big solution. Or it just hasn't worked our way up to conscious thought. Like it's in the midbrain kind of being mulled around, and it hasn't come up to our front brain where we can really start to rationalize these things as solutions. So it's a really simple and elegant method to, tap into, and I mentioned this before, the inner wisdom. Because as we're having conversations with our artwork, I know that sounds pretty out there if you're hearing this for the first time, but it's really not your artwork talking. It's this inner part of yourself that we've just placed out here to acknowledge and connect with. So that the wisdom that people connect with through this process, some people have very, very deep experiences very early on with the simplest art prompt on the first day, because they just, they haven't been able to connect with that wisdom in whatever way for a long time. But the doodles really give you a pause to be able to do that. And, then to begin to work with this information. Life truly does start to shift when you start to follow through on some of the wisdom that your images start to share. Again, I know that sounds out there, but it's not out there. This is your wisdom that's inside. And so the mindfulness, this is a mindfulness bridge, to reconnect with that wisdom. So the book, Doodles Code, describes this process, walks people through their first art prompt, and then it has 8 more art prompts just to get you used to the practice, because it is something definitely a lot of people have not done this before. So I want people to gain confidence in the process. And then there's just a large journal section so that people can continue the process. And the book doesn't take long. It's like 30 to 40 minutes to read, and maybe 10 to 15 minutes to do the little doodle practice itself. But like I said, it's a small but mighty, elegant little practice. So it's one that I share through all of my master classes. And within my own daily practice, I use it as well.
Wonderful. There's much to learn and understand about all these things from you, Jodi. And also, I'm sure, and also from your books, Doodles Code, Drawn to Yoga, and also from your podcast, the I Wrote podcast. And so, what is the best way for people to connect with you, learn more of these things, also become your client?
Just go to jodirosestudio.com/offerings. And that's Jodi, Jodi, Rose, studio.com/offerings. That puts you on my newsletter list. So once a week, you would then get the summary of the podcast and the podcast link, as well as links to other free resources. When you go to jodirosestudio.com, of course, there's the pop-up. And so that is the offerings link as well. So there's certainly many things to explore. Other free things like 30 days of art prompts for free. There's a download there that's quite obvious on the homepage. So there is no shortage of resources for people wanting to explore this. But I think that offerings is a really great start. And you'll get access to the art prompts and other free resources there as well.
Wonderful. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.